science fiction. We make no guarantees, however, how long it will remain fiction. Fiction. Fiction.
Hybrid salutations, all you cognonauts out there, and welcome to Exofathom, the show that explores the outside reaches of understanding. I am your host, Nick, and I am joined, as always, by my two lovely co-hosts. Ayla, how you doing?
Lovely as ever. How are you doing?
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. And we got Mike here. How you doing, man?
Oh, hanging in there.
As always. Yeah,
Lovely.
I'm feeling that. I'm feeling that more than most episodes. This particular episode, I hit kind of a wall creatively and got a little bit of brain drain. So I spent most of my day yesterday researching topics to talk about tonight, and I went from topics like synchronicity to the planet Saturn to the god Saturn, and then I kind of settled here at the Sphinx. And I did so because it's always been something that's really intrigued me. Obviously, it's very iconic. When you think of ancient Egypt, you think of the pyramids and you think of the Sphinx. And there's something very enigmatic about it. And perhaps that's why the Sphinx itself is a symbol for mystery. But before I get into talking about anything particular, I wanted to ask you guys a couple questions about Sphinx and sphinges, if you want to know the plural.
I did not know that. Sphinges?
Yes, sphinges, yeah. Sphinges. Yeah.
Here's a question, though. Why do we need a plural of sphinxes if there's only one sphinx? Are there more than one sphinx? Or
yes.
Are there sphinges?
There are sphinges. We will find out a little bit later. While we only really know of one or two sphinges, there is much lore and myth around the concept of there being many. But before we get into perhaps the origin of the Sphinx or where they might have come from, I wanted to ask you guys, what do you think about the Sphinx that makes it? What is it about the Sphinx that makes it so iconic? Because I was trying to think about this, and it's like I could think about the age, I could think about kind of this where it's positioned, but I wanted to hear your guys' thoughts because, as I said, it's a powerful symbol. And it's also one of our oldest monuments.
Well, before we get into the question before the show, I wanted to first check in about this brain drain because I realized you asked us how we're doing, but how are you hanging in there, all things considered?
Oh, well, I guess I'm doing okay. As I said, I'm just having a little bit of creative blockage right now. I sat in front of my computer for about 3 hours yesterday, just kind of like thinking about what I wanted to talk about. And just like, I don't know. I was second guessing myself a lot, I guess. You know, I get into this mode where it's like, well, I want to make something interesting and I want to talk about something interesting, but how do I know that it is interesting? So I kind of overthink sometimes, and then I get into this like, well, then I shouldn't even do this topic because I can't. You know what I mean? So,
no, I totally get it.
I did that a few times.
What they say about overthinking, what is it? Don't cut off your nose to spite your face.
Very good. Yes. Right.
That was a social chess move right there, sir.
That was good. For those who didn't catch the pun, the Sphinx is notoriously noseless. So,
but yeah, so I hope I'm glad you're hanging in there. I'm really also excited to talk about the Sphinx because I don't know that much about it. Aside from the fact that the paws, like, they're really out of proportion. And, I don't know. I know that, like, technically speaking, it would have been really hard to create this back in the day. But I mean, like the face, if the nose was still there, it's so well done. Did they just give up on the rest of the body, or is it supposed to be representative of something, not the legs? Like they're so
Uh,
out of proportion.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a reason for that, and the reasons are very highly contested, and I think we'll get into a couple of the reasons a little bit later. But
Ooh, nice.
there's definitely a difference between the bottom half of the Sphinx and the top half, and as most people can tell, they look very different. A lot of people think, well, a lot of people, the common knowledge amongst Egyptologists is that at some point it was altered. They don't know how or exactly who did it, but we can definitely get into that a little bit later.
I like it. So yeah, I mean, aside from the observation, I just think about like riddles and what I remember from the cartoon series Mummies Alive, which was my fave. That's about all I got.
Nice. What about you, Mike? Does anything stand out to you when you think of the imagery?
Now that Ayla brought up it doesn't have a nose, I just think of Voldemort and a cat.
Oh my gosh. Voldemort?
Could be.
Really
Did she know something?
I've enjoyed like just the mystery surrounding it. Right, there's always rumors of like secret rooms and things like that, and then just the like why the hell is it there? Right? But it's all for me. It was always very like surface level stuff. I wasn't that pulled in by it compared to like something like the pyramids.
Right. For sure. Well, and I think it's, it's interesting too, because of the way the Sphinx is positioned, the pyramids kind of overshadow it because they're just so large. But in fact, the Sphinx is older than the pyramids. And so it's interesting to kind of note that, because at least I know that the second two pyramids were not there at the time they believe the Sphinx was built. I don't know if the first pyramid of Giza, I couldn't really discern that from my reading. I don't know if the first pyramid of Giza was built before or during the same time. It's possible. Or perhaps the Sphinx is much older, which we can get into a little bit later. But yes, who knows? It's aliens, of course.
Always aliens.
Obviously.
Always aliens.
You should have put a little monolith on top of the Sphinx in today's graphic.
Or put a little UFO or like zooming away from it. Yeah, I should have done that. That would have been good. So my next question for you guys, and then I'll let you guys know. I got two more questions for you, but then I'm gonna let everybody know how this will be structured. Pretty simple. My first question is, what do you think by looking at it? What automatically comes to your mind? Like, if that's supposed to be a symbol of something, what is that symbol? If you look at the Sphinx, what significance does it portray to you?
No lie, I think about the pillows that are called husbands. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
What?
There are these pillows, and I guess they're called husbands, which I don't understand why. Maybe it's because like an allusion to that birthing method where you're behind the woman, but it's like a big pillow. So think of like a square, give it a little more back support, and then give it little arm rests. You've seen these pillows.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's what I think of. I feel like the Sphinx is like it was a big chair and then somebody put a head on it.
Oh, like a giant throne for some Nephilim or something.
Totally.
Cool. That
or
would be pretty
alien.
Cool.
Very giant alien.
I could see that. I think that's as good an explanation as any. Mike,
right?
What about you? What is there
smart.
any Is there any sort of like one word or two word descriptor that comes to your mind when you see a Sphinx? Because it's not necessarily obvious to us, right? Like, what is it supposed to mean? What is it supposed to symbolize?
Like, so power?
Power's good. Yeah.
Well, because I was going to go on some tangent about hippogriffs, but usually like mythological chimeras are symbols of power and nobility at times, I believe. Like the nice ones. Like you could tell my brain is running into that creative wall we're all talking about.
Yeah.
I dig it.
But no, like usually when things like when that chimera is of something good, it's usually like power, nobility, and like a magnanimity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And that's
definitely.
what I tend to think.
Mm-hmm. I can see that. Yeah, you think of the like something like a griffin, which is still very much an English coat of arms figure today. Yeah, I definitely can think of that. I definitely could see that. Yeah. And so my last question to you guys before we get into this structure and I give you some information about the myth of the Sphinx as well as the structure itself. If you guys could have one animal feature, what would it be and why?
Like on my person?
Yes, you would have to have it on your body, but you could choose any animal feature.
I would want wings, like giant archangel size wings, so that if I want like to be alone, I just shroud myself with these giant wings or I just fly away.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they'd be dope. And then at rest, they would just be these domineering like shoulder pads ahead of, like floating above my head.
Okay.
I thought about this before.
All right. Yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah.
Mike, what about you?
Well, since Ayla stole my answer,
Yeah, everybody
Dang
wants one.
it.
everybody just wants to fly, right?
Yeah.
Until they become Icarus, and then now nobody wants to fly.
Yeah, well, I'm not gonna fly that high. I would keep it, just level enough so everybody can see me fly and be really jealous. Just kidding. Yeah, I don't know where I'd fly to.
It sounds
You
pretty
know.
good though. That sounds like
Mhm.
you just got to dodge all the bullets that people would shoot at you.
I
Maybe.
suppose, or I could.
Yeah, the governments would
privatize.
shoot you down pretty quick.
No, I'll
You could do the Iron Man thing.
privatize. So I'll have an app, and if you're really late for something, you just sign up for the app, and people bid, and whoever the highest bidder is, I'll go pick you up and fly you somewhere else. Then that
Yeah.
way, I'm not a threat. I'm just like another
Capitalistic
shill.
angel. Look at that.
I always thought about this
Capitalistic
about
shill.
flying. You would also, if you were able to fly, you'd also have to be impervious to the elements as well, right? Because you wouldn't be able to fly more than a few hundred feet off the ground if you didn't have some sort of insulation or, speed defense.
Well,
True.
I'd wear a puffy jacket. Maybe I can tailor a puffy jacket over the wings so they stay warm. That of course might affect the workability of the wings. So I mean,
No, I don't think the
there's things
wings
to
would
work
be the
out.
issue. I think your body would be. I'm sure the wings are fine at high altitudes, but it's, I think your
I'm
body
sure somebody
would
would want to make like a suit though, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
that's
David
true.
Blaine, wasn't it him that did like the halo jump and he was like on balloons and then he just let himself go. So all I would need is like, some sort of like oxygen respirator and then like a really nice suit.
All right. Well, then there you go. Need to get on designing that.
Yeah. And an app developer,
What about you, Mike? What is what animal feature would you have?
Oh man, I'm stuck because I like the water. I like I boogie boarded at Venice Beach growing up, so I'm stuck between like web hands and like feet, so I could get just better water movement, or gills that I can like switch in and out with my lungs.
Like
I
being
think you want
amphibious.
gills.
Yeah.
Mhm. Because you
Yeah, I
can't
think
play
the gills are
guitar with webbed fingers.
That is
That is
very
true. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I was trying to think about this as well. It's actually kind of an interesting question. I think I would want it would be cool to have like the adhesive of a tree frog. You know what I mean? Just so you could walk on ceilings or something. I mean, that would be pretty fun.
That would be pretty cool. What if you can't
Or
control
the spinneret of a spider. Could you imagine? This
it?
So you would
I don't want to
poop
know where the web's
webbing.
yeah, pretty
Cleaning the
much.
toilet would be horrible. It'd be like every time somebody goes after you, someone's doing that saran wrap prank.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
in the toilet. Just seal it off.
There's a What If Marvel comic where Spider-Man takes on, like, he becomes an actual spider, and that becomes a part of the plot. Like, you poop web, and it's so bizarre.
Yeah, it's pretty bizarre. I mean, it would be awkward, but like imagine all the spider silk that you can make.
Be pretty good. You can make that suit for Ayla.
Yeah, there you go. Spider silk suit.
Yeah, I don't know, man. It came out of your butt. That'd be hard to sell. I don't even wear like silkworm scarves. I don't know.
Well, just don't worry about it. Don't think about it.
Yeah.
Dude, silkworm farming is vicious. I just putting that out there. If you've ever wondered how silk is made, look it up and you'll be horrified.
I had a silkworm farm when I was a kid.
Were you horrified?
No, I mean silkworms are cute. And
they are cute.
You just take their little cocoons and then they become butterflies.
Yeah, but not.
We didn't do like the industrial one where you tie one up to one of those Clockwork Orange machines and then start spooling the silk out of them.
Oh gosh, I don't know if they do that. No, but like when I was in Cambodia, I went to one of the farms because I thought they let them do their thing to maturity and then it's all like a natural, beautiful thing. But no, they take the silkworms and then once they have their cocoons, they don't let them grow. They just put them in the sun and let them like burn to death.
Oh, that's sad. No,
yeah. And then they boil them and then oh, well, I'm glad you let yours free. That was nice.
Yeah, of course. Okay, well, now
that all of a sudden,
yeah, I know. Now that we talked about murdering silkworms,
genociding. No, I'm just kidding.
No, it's all good.
Say no.
I wanted to get into kind of like the layout of what I wanted to talk about. So I want to start with the myth of the Sphinx first. Kind of get a background about what the creature is. And then we can get into the riddle of the Sphinx, which is kind of attached to the myth, so it won't be that long of a segment. But then I wanted to talk obviously about the monolith itself and the structure. So without much further ado, let's just get right into it, folks. The Sphinx is a mythical creature with the head of a human, a falcon, a cat, or a sheep, and the body of a lion with wings of an eagle. In Greek tradition, the Sphinx has a head of a woman, the haunches of a lion, and the wings of a bird. She is mythicized as treacherous and merciless, and will kill and eat those who cannot answer her riddle. This deadly version of the Sphinx appears in the mythology and drama of Oedipus. Unlike the Greek Sphinx, which is a woman, the Egyptian Sphinx is typically shown as a man or an androsphinx. In addition, the Egyptian Sphinx was viewed as benevolent, but having a ferocious strength similar to the malevolent Greek version. Both were thought as guardians and often flanked the entrances of temples. And the word Sphinx comes from the Greek word sphingo, which means to squeeze or to tighten up. This name may have been derived from the fact that the pride of lions, the hunter is the lioness, and they kill their prey by strangulation or biting the throat of the prey and holding them down until they die. Let's see. Apollodorus describes the Sphinx as having a woman's face, the body and tail of a lion, and the wings of a bird. And Pliny the Elder actually mentions that the origin of the Sphinx is Ethiopia, in which they come aplenty, apparently. So I thought that was a pretty interesting little tidbit of information. So the Sphinx that we see in Egypt, and even in the myth that we're going to talk about in a moment, apparently this Sphinx that was in Egypt or Thebes came from Ethiopia, in which that's where the home of the Sphinx was. So it's interesting to me that this sort of creature traveled from Ethiopia all the way up to Egypt and then also to Greece. And I wonder if that's just the concept of the influence of information sort of exchanging between the Ethiopians, the Egyptians, and the Greeks, because all three of those societies were actually quite close to each other and did a lot of intermingling. And perhaps that's the reason they have this sort of hybrid symbolism, being that the Sphinx is a hybrid animal. But I wanted to ask you guys, what do you think is also an explanation for the significance of the hybrid?
Well, no, so just to refresh me real quick. So in all three of the cases, it's it's like depicting some sort of a non-natural character, like a god or something, but it's like this hybrid creature.
Yes, it is a hybrid creature. They tend to, and in the Greek mythology, and there is actually a little Egyptian mythology about Sphinx, but in the Greek mythology, especially, they're part of sort of the Titan class. That is to say, the class of monsters that ruled the world before the Olympians came.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. I'm thinking about it. I don't know. Do you have anything?
I think like they were creating a symbol, right? And you kind of want, like, maybe the idea that you were trying to take, it doesn't all reside in one animal. So you take different animals and combine them together to create a more powerful symbol.
Yeah, I would definitely have to agree with you on that, especially when you consider the concept of the Sphinx bottom being basically that of a lion. And in a lot of the mythology as well, they have the kind of the lower end of the lion, but their tail is a serpent. So that would kind of add to this sort of hybrid idea of taking all the best characteristics. And of course, they usually have the head of a human, maybe perhaps indicating that the human's superior brain with the lion's sort of superior muscles and body structure, and maybe the serpent's superior cunning or stealth.
Indeed, I would agree. I think that, like, whenever you see human parts, it's usually the head, right? Because of our brain. Everything else is kind of weak.
Yeah.
And then the pride and the strength of a lion with the cunning and stealthiness of a snake. It works. It's a powerful image.
It certainly does, and it's interesting to me because I think, and like Alice helped me bring up just a moment ago, the Sphinx is sort of this symbol, and I think I'm going to mention this again in a little bit, but forgive me if I repeat myself, but it's this sort of symbol of the ancient world before the before the ancient Greeks even came into the picture, or even the great ancient Egyptians. So to me, it's like this kind of like this remnant of a world gone by, which I think is quite interesting.
Yeah, I do like the ties to like the Nephilim and things like that. I'm sorry for cutting you off, Ayla. What were you gonna say?
No. I mean, it's fascinating to think about it. Because one, you don't think about the dates. It's always just kind of usually lumped in with the pyramids. Maybe that's just me, but to separate them like that, and then to also note surrounding regions having these similar hybrid creatures, it's just fascinating to me, especially because, like, when you look at mythical creatures, like, I was just talking about this to somebody today. So being indigenous or whatnot, like, if I see a hawk in the sky, to me that's a good omen, that's a good symbol, and it's a real thing. The hawks exist, which is so different from these character symbols that don't, I mean, in theory, or, well, I mean, look, nobody knows what was going on back there. Maybe these things actually existed, but the likelihood is they didn't. And so you have a group of people who are creating characters that they will not see in their day to day, but they're going to honor. And I always wonder, like, when the shift went from honoring these hybrid creatures that don't exist to honoring our natural world, and blending that in. Which is just something I was wondering about.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting concept because it kind of touches on the sort of the I don't know. I keep coming back to this concept of the old god sort of thing, because it seems as though the Sphinx is like this turning point from And I think even the just the quality of being a hybrid kind of emphasizes this, where it's like it's turning from the chaos of the old ways to the enlightenment of the new ways, and this sort of like and so in the Greek sort of mythology, the Sphinx symbolizes this primordial chaos that was going on back when the Titans were running everything, and they would create these monsters that were, you know, gruesome and even offended the highest gods, and you know, they reigned supreme all over the earth until humans came and created these sort of more hierarchical gods. So I think it's really cool that the concept of the hybrid sort of matches that chaos that was happening before established religion, say.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder too to what extent dinosaur bones were accessible to them. Because we understand, because like if you find a femur of a dinosaur and you find a femur of a human, I mean, I don't know if this is case for all the dinosaurs, but usually when you find a big bone, you know it's a big bone. And so I just think about like some of these monster-sized rib bones and femur bones and tail bones, and even skulls of dinosaurs. And like, you know, because as time moves on, like if you had like a piece of land right now, and then you zoom forward 5,000 years, whatever your land is now, it's going to be buried under a whole bunch of feet or miles of more dirt. I don't know. I mean, whatever the levels are. So if you zoom backwards in time, then you have to assume maybe there were more dinosaur bones scattered about, or other bones that we can't even find yet because they're so deep or something.
Or perhaps even just the fossilization of those bones, right? Because I think that would kind of add to the mythology of these being elemental monsters, because you would see this bone that's encased in rock, and you'd think, whoa, what kind of animal or creature was this? Like it was rock, but it had a form. And then you might think of think of concepts of like golems or elementals or things like that.
Yeah, totally. And I think some bones, depending on the age, like they change colors. Depending on exposure and oxidation, they change colors. Sediment, rock, and surrounding dirt and things like that. Plus, depending on the weather, if it was really cold during a certain period before that, then there could have still been flesh attached to some of these things. Like they just found a whole woolly mammoth after some ice cap melted. If we didn't have the knowledge we did today, we'd be like, what is that? You know, like that's something that just emerged.
Well, and to your point, when the Sphinx was discovered, it was basically just the head sticking out of the sand. So a lot of it was buried. And I'll talk a little bit about this when I speak about how it was discovered and by whom. But yeah, when the Sphinx was discovered, it was just the head on sand, you know? And so they really had no clue that it went down any further, but it was basically absorbed by the dunes of the Sahara.
Wow.
After thousands of years of neglect.
Yeah, and see, even that, thousands of years of neglect. I mean, this is pretty close to the Nile, isn't it? So
and it's right
there
next
were
to the
people
pyramids.
there. Yeah, there were people there that whole time. Why did they just say, let's just let this one? I mean, it's like if your mom says, go clean your room. Okay, well, to clean the room same day, you might not do it. But over the course of like a week or a month, eventually you're going to do it. Thousands of years, you're just going to let this thing get buried? That's so bizarre to me. And like, that's interesting. I don't know.
Look at it from like a municipality thing where, like, you know, I can drive down the street and see abandoned buildings and empty lots that stay that way for decades. Right, like here in LA on the west side, we had train tracks, and those train tracks were there since the 70s or something, 80s, and it took until like 2019 or 2018 for them to actually use it. So I can see where this thing could exist within a civilization and just be totally neglected because the people are just focused on other things at that time. I also
Yeah.
wonder too
Yeah.
how much of the myth, because you have all these different influences, what the storytellers were doing. Because like I'm sure there was tons of tweaks and like people throwing in their own stuff here and there in and different
Did you
things
say
like that.
tweets? Thousands of years.
Tweaks.
Oh,
Tweaks.
tweets.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was
thousands of
like,
tweets
Yeah.
affecting
Pliny the
tweet,
Elder's tweeting a storm nowadays.
you know. Rage tweeting.
Yeah.
That I can totally see where like this hybrid myth came to be because you had multiple storytellers with
Mm,
no centralized place for the story to go because it's all oral tradition.
right. And even, the concept that's the Sphinx itself is really just a hybrid of the Greek and Egyptian cultures, which is really interesting because they had a close relationship back during the days of ancient Greece. I mean, Thebes was a part of sort of the Greek nation, even though it was a part of Egypt. And, so I think there's definitely that sort of illustration to that as well. And to answer your question a little bit, Ayla, as to how it might have gone neglected for so long, it's possible that it was fully covered at some point. And over time, the wind, blew away some of the sand that was covering it. And by the time the head was exposed is when people were actually looking for something.
That does make sense because the Sahara has been moving further south for a long time, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that wind could have been blowing and it could have been completely covered, and Egyptians never knew it was there until the head popped out of the sand.
Right. And if you think about dunes of sand, really all they are is it's just like an ocean, except for over vast amounts of time, right? So
Mhm.
dunes are just like waves, but it takes them thousands of years to move.
Yeah.
I mean, I could concede that, but at the same time, still, it's
It's pretty
66
astounding.
feet high. Yeah, it's
Right.
66 feet high. It didn't get buried overnight, and I doubt that it would have been buried over the course of like a year.
And it's right in front of the Great Pyramids. Yeah.
Right. Which
Yeah.
I wish I could go back to when it was just the head of the Sphinx pointing out and like
Mhm.
measure the height of the pyramids nearby from base to point, and then do that again today. Because if the pyramids got taller, it would stand to reason that, yeah, the Sphinx was buried because even the pyramids had, they were shorter because there was more dirt.
Mm.
But I don't know that we dug more into, I don't know. 66 feet's really high.
Yeah, it's quite a large structure, and we'll get into a little bit more about the structure itself. But first, I wanted to talk about the riddle of the Sphinx. Obviously, the Sphinx is famous for being a riddle asker, and so I wanted to get into that mythology. And here we go. So the Sphinx is said to have guarded the entrance to this Greek city of Thebes and asking a riddle to travelers to allow them passage. The exact riddle asked by the Sphinx was not specified in early tellers of the myth and was not standardized as the one given below until late in Greek history. So they don't know exactly what the riddle was until a little bit later, once they started adding their sort of spin to the story and everything. But it is said in the later lore that Hera or Ares sent the Sphinx from Ethiopia. Let's see, to Thebes, where she asked all passersby the most famous riddle in history. And I'm sure you guys have heard this one before, but if you haven't, you can give it a ponder for a second and maybe an answer. But the riddle goes as this. It's which creature has one voice and yet comes 4-footed and 2-footed and 3-footed? And let's see. So do you know?
So
Ayla?
it has one voice
Mm-hmm.
and it what?
Okay, so I'll read that again because I kind of butchered it. Which creature has one voice and yet becomes 4-footed and 2-footed and 3-footed?
I'm not that smart. I don't get the riches.
Well, a lot of people weren't as smart, and apparently the Sphinx devoured many a traveler that passed by to try to get into Thebes. It makes me wonder how many people knew the answer to this riddle, and was the Sphinx just eating everybody that tried to walk into the city?
Especially since the original question is not known.
Right, exactly.
It's just a ghost town for the whole time.
Yeah, totally. It's like setting your alarm at home or something. It's like, oh, what's the password again?
So true.
It kind of reminds me of what the Monty Python, the bunny, right? No, it's the guardian of the bridge, right? The one that asks 3 questions.
Oh, I'm not well versed in Monty Python.
Oh, you got to watch.
I'm an American.
I know. The Holy Grail is a
no, I'm not
classic.
kidding. I'm American. There's the justification for not watching Monty Python. I'm kidding.
Right? Yeah. So the answer is, and Oedipus solved this riddle, thus gaining him access to Thebes. And his answer was man, who crawls on all 4s as a baby, then walks on 2 feet as an adult, and then uses a walking stick in old age. Do you get it?
Yeah, I get it. You know what's crazy is I thought human at first, and I was like, nah, because I didn't have like a good reason to back it up. But yeah, that makes more sense.
Yeah, and it's actually one of the oldest riddles that we know in history, even though it wasn't created during the time of the Sphinx. It was created a little bit after.
You know, I recently heard a good answer to a riddle. It's the classic, which came first, the chicken or the egg?
Mm-hmm.
So it was a contestant on Survivor who was in the dumb and pretty group, is kind of how they grew. There was like bronze, beauty, and something else. But this guy was like, he's like, clearly the egg came first, because chickens, we have chickens today. You didn't have chickens like in prehistoric days, but you did have dinosaur eggs. Thus, eggs came first.
Yeah.
I was like, that's a really good answer. I mean,
if a dinosaur gave birth to a chicken, I suppose that would work.
Well, you know, Professor, what is it, Alan Grant from Jurassic Park does indeed believe that dinosaurs became birds. So,
yeah, no. I mean, I think most of the science is pretty settled. The fact that dinosaurs did become birds. Yeah.
Raptors.
Raptors.
Yeah, exactly.
Clever girl.
I wonder what Diogenes would have answered. Because whenever I hear riddles, I just think of Diogenes as the ultimate shit poster. So I probably would have.
You probably just would have farted in the Sphinx's face and jumped into its mouth.
brings a human up with him, like
just eat him. There you go.
All right, I'm in the city. Cool.
Him.
Yeah. Well, and as you know, as most people know this riddle and know it as the Sphinx riddle, in some accounts there is actually another Sphinx riddle. This one's a little bit more rare and less cited, but the second riddle goes as follows, and it's there are 2 sisters. One gives birth to the other, and she in turn gives birth to the first. Who are the 2 sisters?
Yin and yang.
That's pretty close. Ayla?
Shh. I'm thinking.
Okay.
Light and dark.
Very good.
I don't know. Oh, light and dark.
Night and day. Yeah.
Night and day.
Yeah. No, that is the second. The cute.
I hate riddles. Ever since I was a kid and I watched freaking Alice in Wonderland and the whole like, why is a raven like a writing desk or whatever? I was just like just throw up the whole desk entirely. I was like, I don't want none of it.
That's why my favorite answer to that riddle, which is actually supposed to be an unanswerable riddle, is Poe wrote on both.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. I like that one. That's a good answer.
Did the Survivor contestant come up with that one too?
No, I didn't get that from ABC Survivor or CBS or whatever it is.
Wow, what are we doing? Are we doing pitches here? Are we doing commercials?
This episode's brought to you by Survivor.
Tune into
No,
prime time on channel whatever.
Yeah.
well, I never watched it when it was like, you know, in its heyday. And then I suddenly discovered it on Netflix and we watched a series and it's pretty good. It's pretty entertaining.
Yeah. Okay, so of course the Sphinx was very, very distraught that Oedipus was smart enough to answer both of her or his riddles. And so being bested at last, the Sphinx then threw itself from a high rock and died.
Pretty proud thing.
Wow.
Yeah. It's just,
Yeah.
I mean, like it was that the deal? Like well,
Don't
maybe
worry,
the
man,
Sphinx
we've all
was just
done
kind of waiting for somebody. I just need somebody to answer this riddle so I can kill myself.
Yeah. Well, it's
That'd
like
be
one of
free.
those it's like one of those wishes where it's like I want to be powerful. I want to be a gatekeeper and eat men who try to enter my city or something like that. And then, you know, your genie or whatever is like, "Okay, granted." However, the minute someone does answer your riddle, you must immediately jump off a cliff and die. Like
Right.
maybe it's just all a wish gone wrong.
Right. Well, and also in the alternate version of the end of the Sphinx, she devours herself, which is an interesting feat. I don't know how
Wait.
you accomplish that, but
She jumped off a cliff and then devoured herself?
no, there's two different ends to the
Oh.
Sphinx that are kind of
Oh.
in contention with each other. One where she jumps off of a high rock and dies. The other one is that she devours herself. But in both cases, Oedipus can therefore be recognized as a liminal or threshold figure, helping effect the transition between the old religious practices presented by the death of the Sphinx and the rise of the new Olympian gods, which I think is kind of an interesting sort of thing that I was kind of alluding to a little bit earlier, is this remnant of the ancient world and how we as humans conquered it and brought in our new world.
Yeah.
It's pretty
Yeah.
dope.
Yeah, that
I-
does work really well.
When I think of like the Sphinx eating him or herself, I think of it as like the snake eating its own tail.
The Ouroboros.
Yeah, and then that just kind of like compounding to a singularity, and then you have the new ways that are birthed after that.
And then a supernova of new ideas. I like that. Yeah. It's like a dying star collapsing on itself. Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty cool. I think that's a good metaphor for that, for sure. And so, you know, this got me to thinking about gatekeepers and mythology. And I think we've talked about Cerberus before, the three-headed hound that guards the gates of hell. You also have the in Odysseus or the Odyssey, Odysseus has to escape the Cyclops, who traps him and his compatriots in a cave. So I was wondering if this, what do you think this gatekeeper role kind of plays? What role does it play in our mythology?
Well, I mean, it's kind of interesting, right? Because mythology is the collection of stories. And then you find out that the storyteller becomes the gatekeeper of these stories and of this knowledge. So I wonder if there's some like really cool meta understanding of like the snake eating its tail kind of thing, where you have the mythology knowledge keepers kind of echoing their own role in this whole entanglement.
Yeah, or perhaps the slaying of the beast of knowledge requires the hero to take on a similar role in order to retain it. Maybe not a similar role, but a elevated role, one that perhaps he has to rise to, or she has to rise to.
Yeah, I mean, I think the ones that keep the gates present the obstacle for a hero. Like, not to get too like hero's journey or anything, but it provides a filter for to use the harshest words that come to mind: the worthy and unworthy. And so if you are devoured by the gatekeeper, then obviously you are unworthy for whatever adventure. But if you got past the gatekeeper, you got past an obstacle that was meaningful for mythology, and it
Mm,
cemented those characters as heroes.
yeah. It's like the threshold to initiation. Um, this sort of gate, at the gatekeeper, obviously a gate. So that it's this, yeah, it's this obstacle, like you said, that you have to overcome in order to get to the higher understanding, or to that sort of meta world after.
Or at
Um,
least just get into the city of Thebes. I hear they
or
got
get
good
in, yeah,
markets.
or get into a city. But it kind of
Yeah.
reminds me of Aladdin too. You have the tiger shrine out in the middle of the desert that will only let in the diamond in the rough, sort of thing. And you
Yeah.
have that concept of being worthy, like Mike said. I think that that's a really cool concept, and I think that there's something in that too, where the hero is always kind of charged with outsmarting the gatekeeper. And this kind of reminds me of not just Odysseus, that has to outsmart the Cyclops by wearing sheep wool to disguise him and his compatriots as sheep as they try to sneak out. But it also reminds me of one of Mike's favorite series, The Hobbit,
Oh yeah, it's
where,
my favorite. So
where
good.
I know you love it so much, where Bilbo has to have the riddles in the dark with Smeagol. And I think that's anybody who's read The Hobbit, a lot of people say that that's probably one of the best chapters in the book. And it's sort of this game of wits that you have to play. And I think it's interesting, and I'll get your guys' comments. I think it's interesting that it usually always has to do with out intellectualizing the obstacle or the gatekeeper. And perhaps that's a recognition of our best tools.
Well, I think so. They might be in different facets, right? Because you have Hercules, or who's not doesn't have to outwit the gatekeepers, I guess, but has his own way of going about it, right? He's not the brightest in the world, but you're right. You do have like your Bilbos. You have your like Sherlock Holmes versus Moriarty types. There's like, I think intellectual strength is just another form of strength. So it's like a muscle. Yeah, I guess it's like, yeah, that out muscling, but it's on the intellectual plane.
Right. And it would make sense that we, in a more elevated society or a post Oedipus society, would favor the intellect over perhaps the brute strength of the animal kingdom.
It's definitely a lot easier to hide. Like if you go about living your life in a brutish way, then you kind of put a target on your back because it's visible. You're physically big, right? But with the intellectualism, you can kind of add that cunning of the snake.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Something to outsmart and outwit and kind of stay in the background. Because yeah, you're right. Anybody who is more about the brute strength, it's, even me as in high school as a guy that was 6 foot, like all of a sudden people wanted to fight me just because I was slightly taller than everybody else. You know what I mean? Like, and I
You're
wasn't,
just
I
so
was,
chill.
I was never like a fighter or anything like that, but I had, like probably 5 or 6 guys that tried to fight me in high school just because I was slightly tall. That was
Hey,
it.
you tall guy.
Yeah, when I walked into Starbucks, I saw it. I was like, that guy got to fight that guy.
I'm gonna. Yeah, there you go. Just something about me. You gotta fight.
There is. The first time I saw you, I was like, just want to punch him.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean,
Well, in my case, it was punching with kisses, but
oh, that's very nice.
Yeah, I liked you. What makes me think about because you're talking about the hero's journey, and before that, you were talking about this transfer from the old gods to something else, maybe humans or new gods or something, and it just kind of makes me think about like the quote where it's like it's something about like government will only exist as long as man needs to be governed or something like that. Just kind of talking about how there's this recognition that we can't be left to our own devices. This is also why we have like so many rules from like a society perspective, but also from like a religious perspective, culture perspective. Rules keep us abiding. They let us know how to act and how to engage with one another. So that being said, if you have these older gods who are like this controller or dispenser of rules and riddles and consequences, and then you have this hero's journey where you have a character who is smart enough to break free from that. I wonder if this all echoes some sort of early murmuring of like self-determinism or like free will,
It's the
something like
Adjustment
that.
Bureau.
What's that?
Huh?
You ever seen the Adjustment Bureau?
Oh, no, is
Sounds
that Matt
familiar.
Damon?
Matt Damon. And so
Oh,
I've
yeah.
seen a
There's
bunch of
like,
clips on it. I haven't seen the whole movie, but it's the same idea where like you have this governing agency that kind of guides you through your life because you're not skilled enough to manage your own life until you get to the point where you can, where you kind of break out of their rules and things like that, and you can write your own fate in a way.
Right.
yeah.
Right.
And
Well,
that's-
yeah, no, I think that you guys are both right on the money. And I think just to add to that, there's this maybe perhaps concept, because I've seen this in a lot of my readings, and especially when I was looking into Saturn. My goodness, the brutality of ancient gods is something to behold. And I think that at some point we as humankind, decided that we needed less brutal gods. And I think that there's something interesting about that, because when you think about the Sphinx, a very brutal and um, a, a god of nature. That's kind of the way I see it. I see them reflected as gods of nature, in which nature is life-giving, but also unwavering and cruel and punishing. And for much of our early history, nature was our biggest enemy. And then at some point, we decided that we needed to stop praising the more animalistic and start looking at the higher mind. And then you see the sort of pantheon of Greek Olympians that comes in, each reflecting an aspect of the human psyche. And then we start to worship that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really well put contrast, because I mean, man is always trying to fight nature. And, like, I think this is why we're driven to find out if the universe is made of an elegant series of events or if it's just chaos ever expanding towards doom. We want to know, because that somehow informs our understanding of our world, even on the smallest levels. And yeah, and I mean, like philosophically, we still haven't come to terms with whether or not we have free will. You can even say sociologically and culturally, we wonder if we have free will and agency. And it's like things have gotten so much more complex, but you zoom into the past, and it's always been this wondering of, where do we fit in, and how do we, become the captains of our ships.
Captains of our destiny. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's great. I think that kind of concludes the talk about the mythological Sphinx or Sphinges.
This sounds like a disease.
It does. It sounds like
I
it
caught
itches.
the Sphinges last week. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love how we can be all like talky about like all these concepts, and then we're like Sphinges.
Yeah.
Told you not to speak with so and so. Now you got the Sphinges,
now
man.
You got the Sphinges. You need a vaccine for that.
Yeah.
So great. I wanted to get into now more talk about the monolith itself. Obviously, that's the picture that we have on our promo right now, and it is honestly the only depiction of Sphinx that we really have at this type of scale. Now, there are plenty of depictions of Sphinx, not just in Egypt, but actually around the world. But a lot of them are kind of their own unique sort of hybrid or chimera. And they don't necessarily fall into the same category as this Egyptian Sphinx. So the Great Sphinx of Giza is a 4,500-year-old limestone statue that's situated near the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt. It is the oldest known monument in Egypt, and it measures 240 feet long and 66 feet high. And it's one of the largest known monuments of the ancient world. I think it is except for the pyramids. And it is one of the most recognizable relics of ancient Egyptians throughout the history. But the origins of this structure is actually still debated. There's speculation on where it comes from, but there's no solid evidence and actually no real knowing 100% who made the Sphinx. So it goes on to say it's impossible to identify what name the creators called their statue when they created it. But the Great Sphinx does not appear to have any known inscription of the Old Kingdom. And there are no inscriptions anywhere describing its construction or its origin purpose. In the New Kingdom, the Sphinx was revered as a solar deity, Horus, though there may have been conflicting evidence and viewpoints over the years. The view is held by modern Egyptology that large remains at the Great Sphinx. The Great Sphinx was built approximately 2500 BC for the pharaoh Khafre, or Khafre. And he was the builder of the second pyramid of Giza. But the issue is that there is no real dating. And the one thing that we know about Egypt and a lot of the monuments in Egypt is that they are very good at letting you know who their structures are for and who built them, which is interesting to me because it seems almost like you would want to have that plastered everywhere on this, this sort of marvel. Aside from the pyramids, this is one of the biggest, monoliths that the Egyptians had. And, you think about the pillars and the obelisks that they have. They're a fraction of this size that are covered in hieroglyphs. And you see the Sphinx just kind of bare. Yeah. With nothing really, really telling you of where it really came from, which just kind of adds to the whole mystery of it. But before I get into some further maybe speculation about that, I wanted to talk about sort of how the Egyptians valued the symbol of the Sphinx. So it was also common for pharaohs to have their own faces depicted as the head of the Sphinx in guardian statues for their tombs. The ruler's ego may have played a part, but it's also an Egyptian tradition to link the rulers with the gods, as they themselves are supposed to be viewed as demigods of sorts. In this case, portraying the pharaohs as a Sphinx guardian was linking them to the solar deity Sekhmet, who herself had the body of a lioness. If you guys remember our vampire episode, we talked about the ancient goddess Sekhmet, who is an Egyptian goddess and a lioness of war. And so that's kind of the explanation, Ayla, for the lion body shape, at least to modern Egyptologists, that it could perhaps be a nod to Sekhmet.
Now, remind me, is Sekhmet the one who is similar to the female deity? Not like the woman before Eve?
Oh, Lilith, yeah.
So this would be the one that didn't get her like fair shake.
Well, I mean, Sekhmet was different than Lilith. Sekhmet was just was a deity in the Egyptian pantheon. I believe a sister to Horus, or maybe some sort of relative. Yeah, but Lilith was in the Christian tradition.
Oh no, I remember that. I guess I'm just thinking about like why you don't see. Well, anyway, I was just gonna make like a weird correlation, but I'm listening.
Oh yeah, no,
carry on.
No worries. Yeah, you can make a correlation.
Well, no, because okay, so I thought that for some reason Sekhmet was like a good character that somehow got corrupted by the history of man, and so then I'm like, well, typical, yeah. Then you wouldn't have any inscribings on this thing because they're just like, forget about her. but I don't know that lines up 100%. I was trying to be salty without
not
enough.
necessarily. Yeah,
Not enough info.
it would make sense if that were the case, but actually Sekhmet was quite celebrated, although she was very much feared by the Egyptians. They did have a festival of her. Remember, we talked about the beer that they would make with pomegranate juice that would look like blood. Remember, and they would talk about this festival took place when the Nile River would overflow and the silt from the riverbed would churn and create a red sort of river.
By golly, I'm just going to have to watch that episode again, as should our listeners. If you're interested in this, please go back to our October episode on vampires. It's very fascinating. And yeah, I guess I was maybe thinking she was like, at some point there was like a shift in public opinion. But yeah, I'm going to have to listen to that one again. And we'll do like an exo-bit. Was she wronged? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting too is if you want to talk about that kind of sort of difference in disposition towards the sexes, the Egyptians definitely had much more, I think, maybe a healthier attitude towards the female archetype. It seems as though the Greeks had a more I don't know if you want an antiquated idea about an antiquated idea about what the female archetype is, because if I should have made the distinction, but the Greek Sphinx is a female, and she tends to be merciless and very brutal, whereas the Sphinx in Egypt is a male and tends to be a little bit more benevolent. But then you also have a character like Sekhmet, who is, while ferocious, also revered and very much respected. So I think they had kind of a healthier outlook.
Well, that makes me feel a little better.
I think it has to, well, without like any inscriptions, it may be the way that they viewed time. So there's some Greek philosophers that are. Or is it some? There's one, and I can't remember, but the quote comes down to something like, "Do you really think time changes just because the sun rises and falls? Like, if you really think that, then you don't understand the nature of reality a lot. Like, you're missing a lot of things if you think the day actually changes.
Right.
Life is one continuous day. So if life is one continuous day, then what's the point of marking down some date for voting when the things stand so tall and beautiful?" Right.
Absolutely. I would definitely agree, except for the fact that the Egyptians inscribed everything else. So, I mean, I think that kind of just adds a little bit to the enigma. And so to carry on, the Sphinxes were actually not Sphinxes with non-royal humans or animal heads were much more common, as they were used as Sphinx temple guardians. One good example is the temple complex in Thebes that had 900 sphinxes with ram heads representing the god Ammon. Throughout Egypt's history, they were mostly used to protect royal palaces and tombs, and they were commonly built by and for pharaohs. However, there was no royal exclusivity to the Sphinx. If a commoner wanted to buy or carve a Sphinx figurine, to paint a Sphinx image on a plate or a vase, or even to build a smaller or bigger statuette of their own, they were allowed to do so. And the Sphinx has been universally beloved and worshipped mythological creature for all ancient Egyptians. And they, I guess the biggest thing the Sphinx symbolizes to these ancient cultures was protection, mystery, wisdom, and strength. So kind of all the things that we touched on prior. And so, as I said, it's the biggest mystery really of the Sphinx is that we kind of just have this assumed idea about where it came from and who created it. As I said, the common knowledge right now is that the pharaoh Khafre was the one that commissioned the Sphinx, but there are people who think differently. But before I get into sort of the fringe topic of the Sphinx perhaps being a lot older than it is, I wanted to just talk about the discovery real quick. Um, pardon me. So this ancient monument, it was actually discovered in 1817, which is interesting. And it was the first modern archaeological dig, and it was led by Giovanni Battista Caviglia. And they managed to uncover the Sphinx's chest. So when they found it, like I said, it was just the head. And so in 1817, they kind of started the first dig to excavate the Sphinx, and they got to its chest. And obviously, we know there's much more than that. But the Sphinx was finally fully excavated in 1925 to 1936 by an archaeological expedition led by Emile, I think it's Barres, Emile Barres. And it's during this period that most of the images of the Sphinx are taken, and you see like a lot of these black and white photos of people going to see the Sphinx, because back in 1925, 1930, having that excavated, that was a big thing, and it drove tourism to the Sphinx in droves. I mean, I think about this really famous photo of Louis Armstrong and his wife in front of the Sphinx while he's playing the trumpet, and it was kind of the go-to place to be for anybody who had a little bit of adventure in their hearts, which I think is kind of interesting. Did I lose you guys?
No, you didn't. I muted myself to turn my heater on.
Oh, okay.
It's cold here. But no, I didn't know that Louis Armstrong made it over there. You forget people were flying or taking ships and moving around. But yeah, no, that's it's funny. The hip place to be. For something that was so neglected, it got buried, and then all of a sudden everyone's like, "Oh, look at this. It's cool again." Like typical. Freaking hipsters, man.
Yes. And it was actually during these sort of excavation missions that they started to realize the Sphinx might have chambers in it, like Mike said. So it's still kind of a hotly contested issue because, unfortunately, during the restoration, apparently some boneheads blocked off the passages with cement. And so any modern sort of exploration of the Sphinx is almost impossible today. But prior to the restoration, in which most of the passages in the Sphinx were sealed off with concrete, it was said to have at least 6 different passages that would lead to a sort of like a burial room inside the head itself, and then multiple burial chambers underneath the Sphinx itself as well. And I thought that was crazy interesting that there's actually a burial chamber inside the head. That would make a lot of sense, and it makes me wonder, was the pharaoh buried there inside the head, do you think?
Gosh, well, yeah, well, it makes me wonder if maybe because you alluded at some point to maybe that it being created by 2 different groups of people. So like the first group could have been like, "Oh yeah, let's build this thing. That's where you get the base, and they have chambers." And then I don't know, maybe somebody was like, "Well, I don't know what this was, but it's a really good foundation. Let's build a head." And so, yeah, I mean, I have to think about that.
Yeah.
Why would they? That's weird. I never thought that there would be chambers in the head itself. I just thought it was like a solid thing.
Yeah, you would think that it is, but apparently there's a burial chamber in the head. There is an entrance at the chest where like if you walk towards the paws, basically like that entrance there. There's one on top of the head as well. Pardon me. That was sealed off. And then there are a couple on the base of the Sphinx as well, which is interesting. But unfortunately, a lot of these, as I said, during the restoration, a lot of these chambers were sealed off. So we will actually probably never know what's really in there.
Wait a minute. So the restoration so the Sphinx was like kind of degraded. They unearthed it. Then they restored it. And they said, we're just going to seal up all the insides.
The issue is that, well, according to the stories, they were unaware that these chambers were there, and so just during the restoration, apparently, they were accidentally sealed off, which I don't necessarily buy, but I'm also very
I don't either.
I'm also very skeptical about how little they let you see inside any of these structures in Egypt. Like, why can't we walk into the Great Pyramid of Giza? Why? Like, why can't you walk through that? Wouldn't that be an amazing experience?
Aliens. It's
Aliens.
really,
Yeah.
it's a burial chamber for some Nephilim thing.
Yeah, that can't be awoken.
Yeah, or like just humans can't see it because it would freak them out. Like that's why we can't even do the lobotomy thing and like get in through the nose. You know,
Right. Yeah, they had to. Yeah, the nose was the key.
Oh, man. But yeah, no, I always wondered that. Yeah, why can't you go and? I mean, like, you know, not. I don't know. I mean, I guess they worry about, you know, degrading the stone and stuff. But I know, like Angkor Wat and all those places.
Yeah, you can free roam that area.
You can free roam. I think they started to pull back a little bit because people were touching the walls, and they're like, "Don't do that because you're gonna rub off all the art." But yeah, but just put like a little rope, and they just rope off areas.
Yeah.
Even like some of our oldest places here in California, like Painted Rock up in Santa Barbara, which has like some of the oldest art from the Chumash tribe. You can go right up to it. I don't think you can touch it though, because you start to damage some of like the cave paintings, but you can go right up to it.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that they've sequestered, and it's probably due to a lot of the pillaging that happened in the 1920s and 30s in Egypt. I think because obviously there was a boom with this sort of like discovery of the Sphinx and then all these other tombs and obelisks. And then obviously you realize that you're sitting on a treasure trove of ancient artifacts and relics. And so perhaps in order to preserve things, they started making it more inaccessible.
Perhaps. However, there are no photos from the inside of the Sphinx.
No,
like you would think that if you're going to quell human curiosity, because you know, the minute you say don't go here, people are gonna like try to get in. So it's like, yeah, wouldn't it behoove them to just have like a virtual tour and then be like, all right, nobody's going in? Because then
there are photos of people on like inside the Sphinx, but they're poking their heads out, or like there's one in this like 1925 of this guy standing in the hole of the head of the Sphinx, and you know, like, but yeah, there's no photos of the actual inside of the Sphinx.
Yeah, and then like there's this picture I'm looking at now where it's like, is the Sphinx hollow? And it's got this gorgeous like interior with columns and so pretty. Like, yeah, like why isn't there just one photo?
Yeah, it's a mystery. It's really one of those mysteries that I don't really know per se, because as I said, there's a lot of enigmas surrounding the Sphinx, and you know, there's even many hypothesize that the Sphinx is much older than Egypt in the first place. And so we're going to get into the little bit of that. Now, this could be its own episode entirely. I highly recommend that if you're interested in something like this, look up people like Robert Schoch, John Anthony West, and Graham Hancock, and look into their works about the Sphinx, because they have done lifetimes of work trying to convince the world that the Sphinx is older than it is. And, you know, at least two of them are scientists, and they've spent their entire lives trying to convince the world that the Sphinx is older than it is, even though the academic community has fought them the entire way. Which is kind of sad, because they were not able to see the full recognition of the Sphinx, the Sphinx's true age to their estimation, but the fight still continues. And one of the major arguments they have for the Sphinx being much older, and by much older, I mean, instead of it being 4,500 years old, we're talking about 6,000 to 7,000 years old, which is a considerable amount. You're talking a 3 extra thousand years. Their main argument for this is that at the base of the Sphinx, there is notably a different type of erosion that occurs than at the top of the Sphinx. Now, a lot of people want to say that it's possibly because the Sphinx was buried, but the problem is that this is the type of erosion that only really happens, and geologists have stated this as well, that only really happens with water. So the contention is that the Sphinx has a significant amount of water erosion at the base of it, so much so that it's literally impossible that it could be in the 4,500-year-old range, because during that time there was no water in that area and very little rainfall, almost to the point of zero. So what they decided to do was look back as far as they could using climate science and geology and just sort of information about the area in general, and see when there was a significant amount of rainfall in that area. And the closest they could find was around 6,000 years ago, 7,000 years ago. So therefore, their argument is that because of this significant rain erosion on the base of the Sphinx, the only time that it could have been constructed would be around the 6,000, 7,000 year mark, and not the 4,500 year mark. Further, they talk about the concept that the Sphinx itself wasn't actually human, it was a lion. Like you said, Ayla, the body and the base of the Sphinx is way out of proportion to what the head is. So what they postulate is that it was originally carved, a carved figure of a lion, which would kind of piggyback on the concept of Sekhmet, perhaps being a god that was carried over from a ancient civilization where they built this lion statue in the middle of the desert, right? So what they think is that since the head was not covered in sand, it eroded so much so that it became kind of much smaller and a little bit more nubby, I guess. And that the ancient Egyptians, when they came back to that area, found the head sticking out of the sand and decided to shape it into the shape of themselves, humans.
Oh, that's kind of rude, huh? It's like Mount Rushmore.
Yeah. But it would explain as to why the head is so much smaller compared to the proportions of the actual Sphinx itself.
Yeah, and that river dating is really interesting too.
Mm-hmm.
Man, it's interesting.
There's a lot of stories about great floods, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, we have the great, like, you have the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs and things like that. So maybe the Earth was hotter and just had a lot more water at one point, and this was something that goes before humans, even, or something that was here. And through the ice age, through time, that water went back. The sea levels changed, and Pangea and all that other stuff.
Pangea.
I mean, that's my best guess.
Yeah. Well, and the Sahara
I just
Desert.
haven't heard that term for like a decade.
Pangea and stuff.
Yeah. Just a funny word.
And the Sahara Desert was once a rainforest. We know that much for certain.
Crazy.
Now it's probably not as early as 6,000 years, but somewhere within the 12,000 year range, there was a lot more vegetation in the Sahara. So there is speculation about these ancient civilizations that could have been wiped out, and we see this monument in the shape of the Sphinx and kind of assume that it was just created by the ancient Egyptians, when in fact it could have been sort of the cornerstone to their civilization, having found it and sort of modified it in their own image.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, humans or anything existing on this earth, like, if every human just vanished from the earth and whatever came to evolve here would find our artifacts, I'm sure they would reshape them into their own vision.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to think that, if there were some sort of cataclysmic event that wiped out an advanced civilization, perhaps the only humans that would survive would be more primitive humans that could survive in harsher conditions. And so the concept is that where the Sphinx stood could have been a ancient civilization that was very advanced, but due to some sort of cataclysm, eradicated the population down to a very small amount of people, which we know there was bottlenecks in our history. And then those people resettled those areas and kind of built upon them. So I think it's
it seems logical. That seems like to be the cycle for our species.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it would make sense that there's a universality about the myth flood, or the flood myth, a universality about this sort of cataclysm that resets the world, like most of our ancient mythologies have talked about this. And so I believe, and I really hope that someday we find the answer, I really believe that the Sphinx is a remnant of that ancient world, a remnant of the past. And that's kind of ties back into the concept of being a god of the ancient world, and being this sort of boundary line between the ancients and then the enlightened that came after.
Well, and I think it's an interesting time also for archaeology in Egypt, because I remember when I was doing some research for familiars, and I was looking at some of like the mummies and cat mummies out there and things. I did read that the Egyptian tourism agency was the Egyptian government was trying to fund more archaeological digs, because I don't know if you've noticed, but they've been finding a lot more stuff in recent years. And
they just do not run out of
No.
things to dig up.
They don't. And you have to think like sand has to be easier to dig out than other places. So it's like a perfect place to start digging more into our past. And anytime they do find things like that, they see a boom in tourism, of people wanting to go check it out. So I'm anxious to see more. And apparently in 2019, they found a mini Sphinx, a small royal statue was uncovered in Tuna El Gabel.
Oh, okay. Nice. Mm-hmm. Well, it makes me wonder too, like, what else is buried deep beneath the dunes of the Sahara?
I know.
It could be anything. I mean, there could be cities that we still haven't found.
It's true.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think it's interesting because we've had our history about like archaeological findings for so long. It takes time to print textbooks, and it takes time to revise curriculums. It takes time for panels to confer and meet and say, yes, this is true. And it takes time for like international panels to change and revise things in light of new evidence. That being said, like, I feel like there's so many more discoveries happening all over the world right now. We're getting better at digging. We're even using like National Geographic. They showed something in like 2017 where they used some sort of like particle physics measuring system to determine that there was a new void discovered in one of the pyramids. They didn't think it was there. They had no evidence. And then all of a sudden, through some sort of imaging program, they were able to determine that there was this new thing that led them to a whole new area. So I think, it's very exciting. And I think that the more people compare notes, you might see a really cool revision or looking back and saying, okay, well, we know these things have shifted. Let's look at the things that we used deontological logic to get to and go back to these early points and be like, oh, let's see where it leads us.
Definitely.
It's exciting to see technology advance in a way where we can dig without digging, because like so much effort to dig through all of that. And like physically dig. So if you can just image process it from space, I mean, you're doing some good stuff there.
And you got to think, I mean, Ian, Dr. Grant was able to see that velociraptor through that little seismograph thing that they did
Right.
all the
it's
way
true.
back then. So we got to think that the technology is much better now. So it'll be interesting. Hopefully they can map out what's inside the Sphinx for sure.
They won't tell us unless.
They won't tell us.
I have a feeling that they're just sitting on it for when the economy or when their economy gets real bad, then they'll release it.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
sitting on.
It's just a
Like,
whole
we
bunch of
remember
aliens hanging out
1917.
there. Is like, is it our time yet? No. Hold on.
So you guys love the scene in Star Wars? Well, get a load of what we see in here. This is a interdimensional time bar.
Yeah, they could
That'd be
build a
pretty
bar
dope.
inside of that. That would be.
I mean,
pretty
I'd
cool.
drink there. That sounds like
Yeah.
a watering hole.
Inside the
Yeah,
head of the Sphinx. That'd be pretty sweet.
Oh my god, yeah.
How you know?
Imagine all the inspiration you could get.
True.
Yeah.
Very true.
Well, before we sign off and wrap up, I wanted to ask one more question for you guys, and this is the most important question I have for the evening.
More
This
questions.
is it's got to be. Yeah, you're gonna have to answer it. Sorry.
What is this, an interrogation?
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Oh,
This is the ultimate interrogation. I skipped like 10. I skipped like 10 questions, you guys. You better back up.
Look, just because your hosts are so intelligent that they can answer your questions before you even know what they are.
I know. It's true.
That's the worst though, when you're like, you got your like pages lined up and then someone says something and you're like,
Yeah, that was page 5. Thanks very much.
Yeah, like, do you know I took 4 hours to come up with that question? And
Yeah.
you just in a one-off sentence just answered it. Thanks.
Pretty much. All right. Well, this is my 5-hour thinking question, and I will posit it to you. And this is going to be what we sign out with. Create the ultimate animal hybrid. You get 3 animals to put into one.
Do we have any guidance on like how this animal is to be used? Like, is this going to be our pet?
Power animal.
Right, like
Yeah.
power animal. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
To make me powerful.
Well, yeah. I mean, you could take it into war. You could,
Is it an animal that
fight with
must
it.
be alive today, or
Oh,
can it?
you're
have
making
been
this real
extinct?
unfun.
Okay.
It could just be anything.
Okay. All right. Okay, I want that. And oh yes. Okay. Okay, I'm starting with
Mhm.
a horse, so I can ride it.
Okay. What part of the horse?
Like the body of a horse,
Body of a horse. Okay.
the tail of a stingray, or the
Wow.
barb of a stingray.
All right.
So it can go at you. And then it should have the head of a lion. No, a gray wolf.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like
A big
Yeah.
puppy. That can
a giant dog.
Yeah, that I
with a
can
stingray
ride.
tail.
Could have
All
a
right.
porcupine
Sounds good.
tail, or it like shoots it out, because I think that can shoot quills. But I'm thinking stingray is good.
Fun fact, porcupines do not throw their quills. It's actually a colloquialism we said in order to keep people away from porcupines.
Well, what do they do
It's
then?
interesting enough. They don't do anything. They'll quill you if you touch them, but they don't throw them.
Wait, like, so they just slap you and then the quills stay with you?
Not even that. They just, if you touch the quills, then you'll get stuck. But otherwise, they don't do anything.
Oh, I thought they threw them. I saw this like vet show. It's this like solo veterinarian in Alaska, and she deals with quills all the time. But that's good to know. I'm sticking with stingray then. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Mike, what is your ultimate animal hybrid mashup?
I'm sorry, I'm just relating to the poor porcupine. That's all.
Yeah.
I want the body of a snake, head of an owl, wings of an
Okay.
owl, talons of an owl, and then a horn of a unicorn.
Oh, okay. So like a
Okay.
wiggly owl with a narwhal horn.
Yeah, pretty much. Fly by and just
An image.
Nice. I like it.
Do you ride it, or do you just like have it on a leash?
I mean, it either ride it or let it do its thing. Could be like a companion. Could go clear out stuff, and then when I want to travel, just hop on the back and just fly away.
Okay, I like it.
Nice.
I like it. Nick, how about you?
I was trying to think of like the toughest animal I could think of. So,
Honey badger.
yeah. So I want to go with the. I mean, you got to go with like the head of a grizzly bear, right? That's
Mm,
a big giant animal. Head of a
yeah.
grizzly bear, forearms of a gorilla, and then
Oh.
the back end of a rhinoceros.
Oh my god.
Just be a tank.
Oh,
Just
golly.
yeah, the ultimate fighting machine.
Yeah, there you go. Do you have the
Wow.
hands of the gorilla too, or just
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
forearms? Are
The
you like
forearms
Popeye
and
up in here?
hands. Yeah, the forearms and hands of a gorilla. Yeah.
Nice.
That's good too, because like you can teach it to like, I don't know, do stuff. It's got thumbs. That's handy.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Throw
Yeah,
rocks.
definitely. That's right. Yeah. All right.
All right,
Well,
we're gonna need to like draw these images because this is hilarious.
yeah. Well, that pretty much concludes my episode. Did you guys have anything you wanted to add before we wrap up?
No, that was great, man. I wouldn't have even known you had any brain fog about that one. That was awesome. Thanks for putting that
Well, I
together.
appreciate it. You guys definitely helped. I appreciate you both for helping me pad out the material a little bit with lively conversation.
Look. Don't say anymore. That was 10 out of 10. Would converse again.
I appreciate it. Yes, I definitely appreciate it. I hope you guys enjoyed as well. I hope you, yes.
Oh, no, I was going to say, if I was listening to this and I wasn't a subscriber to this show, I would definitely subscribe. Like, it was that good. It was that good.
Maybe we can get 15
one subscriber.
We'll get there. Don't worry about the numbers.
Yeah. I'm not worried about it. We just hope that you guys enjoy. And we really enjoy having these conversations. We'd be having these conversations even if the show didn't exist. So we figure we might as well put it on the internet and hope other people enjoy it as well. So thank you so much for listening along, you guys. We really appreciate you. Please consider leaving us some feedback if you feel like it. Leave us a comment or a thumbs up or a subscription if you feel froggy. Otherwise, thank you so much for listening, and thank you to Ayla and Mike. You guys are awesome as always. And until next time, Cognonauts, you stay out there, and we'll see you on the next Exofathom. Good night.
Peace.
Later.